Excellent. All right, folks, it looks like we're being recorded and it's about to start. So here we go. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. This is my very first webinar, so if I stumble or if I have some issues with technology, please forgive me. I'm going to try and do my best. So we're all here, as Laura introduced me. Thank you very much, Laura, for the introduction. I'm the chair of publications for BCTEAL. And I thought we would focus in this webinar on the actual BCTEAL journal. We also have a newsletter as well, and I'll mention about that, and maybe we'll look at some of the, compare the two. But we're going to be focusing on the idea of publishing for scholarly purposes through BCTEAL. And so without further ado, I will get us started. So for those of you who aren't in the Okanagan, here's my campus right here. And so this is where I work, and the journal is actually hosted at UBC as well. I just wanted to, before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge that I live and work on the traditional and unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. And I'm very appreciative of where I am. And as you can see, it's a very beautiful part of the world. So I'm coming to you from the Okanagan. So today's big questions, we're going to be thinking about how does the BCTEAL journal support scholarship, and how can we support you as scholars, and also what is the pathway to publication in the BCTEAL journal. So if, as you're engaging in scholarship, you want to disseminate that, how do you do that with BCTEAL? There's some other questions, but that you might have as well. So I'm going to keep my eye on the public chat sort of on the side there. Maybe it's on this side. Anyway, so feel free to type any questions you might have, and I'm happy to answer questions as we roll along. And so don't worry about interrupting me. We're going to keep it super casual today. All right. So an overview, some of the questions I'm hoping we'll have answered as well. You're going to know what the BCTEAL journal is. We're going to talk about open access, explore this concept of being a scholar practitioner, and we're going to look at a little bit at what's being published so far, what knowledge we've created here in BC and disseminated here in BC, and then we're going to sort of look at the pathway to publishing. So that's what we're going to do today. There it is, the journal. This is, so you can see we've got the URL up there at the top. You can also find it just by Googling BCTEAL journal, and it should come up right away. We're actually in our 4th issue in 2019. The journal itself started, the journal itself, it started in 2016. So the journal, it came about directly because of the BCTEAL mission and vision, because BCTEAL, the mission is to share expertise. And so one way to share expertise is by helping our membership publish what they're doing in the classroom, as well as any sort of scholarship that they're doing. And BCTEAL's vision is to support excellence in English language education, and the journal also came out of that vision as well. And so what's exciting is that we're creating this space then for our members to share their knowledge and experience, and to engage with others who share similar goals. And that goal is teaching English as an additional language and supporting our learners. We're not alone. So a lot of what we're talking about tonight, I'm talking directly about the BCTEAL journal, but the BCTEAL journal is what you call a TESOL affiliate journal. And so TESOL, which is the big international organization in the United States, has many different affiliate organizations such as BCTEAL or California TESOL or Washington TESOL or Mexico TESOL. And many of the TESOL affiliates have journals similar to the BCTEAL journal. And so when we started the BCTEAL journal, we were looking at what's going on in California and places like that. And we were really inspired and thought, wow, let's try something like this up here as well. And so we're going to have a little bit of a look at our efforts. So as I said, the journal, it started in 2016. One of the hallmarks of the journal is that it's peer-reviewed. And not only is it peer-reviewed, but it's what we call double anonymous peer-reviewed. So we keep the identity of the authors confidential from the reviewers, and we keep the identity of the reviewers confidential from the authors. And so we try and set it up so that the reviewers and authors aren't really sure of who is who. And then that way they're able to give what we're hoping is honest and constructive feedback. And the goal of the journal is to promote scholarship in English as additional language teaching and learning, specifically here or connected to here in British Columbia. And so also about the journal is that one of the main things about our journal is that it's open access. And so what that means is people never have to pay to publish in the journal, and they never have to pay to read anything in the journal. It's complete dissemination, open and free of knowledge. The journal, because of that, it's being accessed the website's had quite a number of views. Our articles themselves have been read over 18,000 times since we started, and people have downloaded the PDFs from our website almost 9,000 times. So it's kind of exciting to see how the journal's been growing. Another nice thing about the journal is that it's indexed by different important databases, such as the ERIC database, which is important for people to find it if they're looking from a library or a university or things like that. Another nice thing about the journal is that the copyright, it stays with the authors. And so if you publish with the journal, BCTEAL doesn't take your copyright. It's actually all licensed under a Creative Commons license, which actually means that the authors keep their copyright, but anybody can download or read the articles as long as they say who wrote the article and where it came from. So to go a little bit more into open access, what that is, it just means, like I said, we don't charge anything for this service, and people can use whatever's published in the journal basically for any legal purpose, as long as they are recognizing who wrote it and they're reproducing it. Thanks, Ange, for saying nice. Yeah, at BCTEAL, it was really important that it was open access. In fact, when we started off thinking about whether we should put this behind a paywall or behind a membership wall, we thought actually there's ethical considerations that we have to take into consideration. Really, knowledge is for everyone, and people have the right to know what other people know. And we wanted to be able to share knowledge as broadly and as effectively as possible, because we're hoping that we have this higher mission of benefiting humanity and English language teaching around the world. So while the journal is focused on our little corner here in British Columbia, we want to be able to, we hope that what we're doing in British Columbia will help everyone, and we don't want them to have to pay for it. So why should you become involved in the journal? For me, and I've said this before, so if you've heard me talk before, I go on about this quite a lot, but I really think as teachers, what we're doing in the classroom every day is an act of knowledge creation. Teachers aren't just knowledge consumers who read articles and things like that. We're knowledge producers as well, because what we're doing every day is research. We're trying something out in our classroom, and then we're seeing if our students learn, and based on our students learning, we adjust what we do in the classroom. And so I thought this knowledge that we're doing here in BC deserves to be shared for the world's benefit. And one way is by publishing in the journal. And it's reconceptualizing ourselves from quote unquote just teachers to actually thinking of ourselves as scholar practitioners, right? We're in the classroom, but we're also scholars at the same time I like to think of it as an important part of our well-being. So, nowadays when we think about well-being, it's a more holistic understanding. It's not just about whether we're physically healthy, but it's also about whether we're mentally healthy. And I think for us as teachers, there's a third element in addition to our physical and our mental health, but there's also our intellectual health as well. And so like our intellectual well-being is an important part of our identity. And being involved as a scholar practitioner is investing in our intellectual well-being. We're also, as scholar practitioners, we're people who are seeking continuous professional growth, right? We're on this path. And scholar practitioners, like I mentioned, we're creating knowledge in the classroom, and this is our personal practical knowledge that we have from that act of teaching. But if you're a scholar practitioner, you're also taking your personal practical wisdom and you're connecting it to research and to teaching. So it's not just what we're doing by ourselves locked away in our classrooms. It's we're part of a larger conversation, and we're using that in our classrooms. And then it's not just about always taking and trying to improve our own classrooms, but then it's also about contributing to a community's resources. So if you, as a scholar practitioner, we're people who like to share, and we want to help the community in general. And then I think another thing that's connected to all this is, and I like this about BCTEAL, it's our goal is to lift up the teaching profession, right? And enhance the field. And so it's like this constant state of trying to make everyone feel good who's a teacher. And so as scholar practitioners, then you can ask yourself, well, how can I get involved? And so for the BCTEAL journal, there's actually 3 ways that you can be involved. You can be a reader of the journal, you can be an author of the journal, and you can be a peer reviewer. And of course, you can be all 3 as well. And so let's have a little bit of look at this. And also, it's not just about the BCTEAL journal. So as chair of publications, I'm also helping out with TEAL News, which is our newsletter as well. And so people often ask me, well, what's the difference between the BCTEAL journal and the newsletter? And they're both valuable places where you can publish your knowledge. So with TEAL News, which is our newsletter, this actually, we have one coming out early next week. The TEAL News, it's actually, it's an easier review process because it's a desk review, which means that you just send in your article to the editor, and then I'm like, hey, thank you for your article, and then we start working on putting it into the newsletter. In the TEAL News, the articles are shorter, typically around 500 to 1,000 words, or maybe 2,000 once in a while. It's a short timeline to publication. Depending on when you submit an article to the newsletter, we can actually have that published as soon as 1 month, but up to 4 months maybe. It's a friendly journalistic register in TEAL News, and we publish quite often throughout the year. The journal, on the other hand, it's subject to peer review, as I've mentioned. So every article that comes into the BCTEAL journal, it goes out to 2 reviewers who then provide feedback. The articles are longer in the BCTEAL journal, up to 8,000 words, maybe more. It can be a longer process to publication. It could be from 4 months to maybe 1 year from submission till when it's published. And it's in an academic register, and we only publish 1 issue per year. And I'm going to go into the journal in detail, but I also wanted you to know that the newsletter exists as well, and you're welcome to publish in both of these venues. So the journal, though, so focusing on the BCTEAL journal, what do we publish? So one thing that we publish are full research articles, and these are 8,000 words around, and we've got 12 of those per date. However, the way we think of research, though, we think of research writ large. Maybe a better word is scholarship. I like how the TESOL research agenda actually defines research as the spirited inquiry that contributes to the knowledge base of a field, right? And what we're using this scholarship for is so that we can make decisions about what we're doing in the classroom and policies and plans. And so when I say research, I don't mean like an experiment where you have a classroom and you do something to that classroom and then you give them another test. It could be that, but there's other kinds of things as well, which I'm going to show you in a minute. We also publish essays too. So we have the full research articles, but we also publish shorter essays around 3,500 words. And this could be a theoretical analysis, maybe something you've done in the classroom that needs more words than what we would be able to publish in the newsletter. Maybe you have an opinion on a certain teaching method. That's the kinds of articles we would also publish. And then finally, we also welcome book reviews. So for example, if you've read a book connected to English as additional language teaching and learning, and you want to tell everybody what you like about it, this is a good place to publish an article like that. It could also be a textbook that you've used that you really enjoy, things like that. So to date, actually, we've published about 22 articles in the journal since 2016. And it's been interesting because a number of themes have started to emerge over the years. And so basically, there's 6 themes that we've published that have sort of been published in the journal. Of course, if you're thinking about publishing, you can publish on other topics, but I thought it'd be interesting to have a quick look at sort of what's been going on so far. And the articles, they've sort of clustered around teaching English in K-12 contexts. We have a number of articles about EAL for newcomers, so that would be like in settlement situations or maybe link classrooms. We have articles, English for academic purposes, so that's more post-secondary EAL. We have articles about English language learners who are in post-secondary settings in general. There's also articles about teacher development and teacher education. And then, of course, we have the book reviews as well. So let's have a little peek at what's being published so far in the journal. So it's interesting. This is what's exciting for me, is that I think, wow, if the BCTEAL journal didn't exist, maybe some of this knowledge wouldn't be shared with the world. One thing about the BCTEAL journal is that we really strive to work with our authors to bring their articles to publication. So some journals, when you send in your article, they might give you 3 reasons why they can't publish your article. Usually BCTEAL, we would say, hey, here are 3 things we can do to strengthen your article so that we can publish it in the journal. So we have this positive mindset with articles that are submitted. So what have we learned about K-12 English language learners? Well, we've learned about the importance of culturally responsive teaching and learning in K-12 settings. Immersion and engagement and cultural reciprocity are all important. And they work much better than what you might imagine as a traditional ESL program. We've also learned studies have been done that have shown the benefits of moving away from a deficit perspective when you're thinking about children with refugee experiences. There might be a tendency to say, oh my gosh, they don't know how to do the alphabet, or oh my goodness, they're missing this knowledge. But instead, actually, if you look more at what they're bringing with them and the strengths they have, this is beneficial to teaching practice. Some other things that we've learned in K-12 contexts is that the vocabulary that's important isn't necessarily the specialized vocabulary that goes along with a particular subject. Actually, the general academic vocabulary that goes across subjects, or what could be called Tier 2 vocabulary, that's the vocabulary knowledge that correlates with academic success. So think about academic word list type words. Those general words that go across disciplines are the ones that have the most benefit for learners. And then finally, another thing that's interesting that we found, an author found in the journal, was that printing and spelling are important. There's a tendency now to do a lot of keyboarding with students, but it seems that kinesthetic knowledge we get in our hands when we're writing is directly connected to vocabulary learning. And so it's beneficial alongside keyboarding skills to keep teaching printing and longhand writing and things like that. So interesting. Also, we have a number of articles that have been written in newcomer settings. And so, for example, we've had a couple of articles that have focused on portfolio-based language assessment in LINK. And interestingly enough, in these 2 articles, what was found was that actually some adult English language learners actually do have positive perceptions about PBLA, and some English language learners felt that PBLA did help their English language learning, and it was beneficial for them. There's also been an analysis done in the journal looking at key principles of adult education and the principles behind PBLA, or portfolio-based language assessment. And they found that the 2 seem to mesh, and that some of the elements of portfolio-based language assessment are beneficial for adult education. And finally, we've also had an article looking at adult students with refugee experiences. And sometimes we might not know who has refugee experiences in our classes, but actually being able to know about who has refugee experiences is beneficial for helping teaching and learning. So some things that we've learned about EAL for newcomers in the journal. We've also had 4 articles published related to English for academic purposes. So for example, one article found that in English for academic purposes, it's not just about learning language, but skills are important as well. And the more skills students learn related to time management, reflection, and maintaining focus, the better they do in their schoolwork. Another thing that we've learned that was interesting in the journal is that students actually, EAP students in this study, were actually very good at using academic word list words. So remember we were talking about that tier 2 vocabulary that goes across disciplines. Students know what they are. The problem in this particular study was that students seemed to struggle with the words that go around those academic word list words. In other words, the collocations, or the words that those words, the company that those words keep, students were making errors in collocations. And so what this study recommended is that students benefit, rather than teaching word lists by themselves, teaching collocations is important as well. So I thought that was an interesting finding. Two other articles that have been published related to English for academic purposes. One of them related to service learning. And so service learning, that's like volunteer work. For example, students might work in a food bank, or maybe students might help out in a nursing home or something like that. In this one study, what they found was that post-secondary EAL students who had a service learning experience did better in their English composition classes, their first year English classes, than students who didn't. And so they concluded that service learning is a valuable experience for post-secondary EAL learners. And then finally, the last study that we'll talk about related to English for academic purposes was that this particular author found that EAP students, English for academic purposes students, they actually experience these fundamental shifts of mind during class that are related to these rapid growth spurts. You may have seen this with your own students, where suddenly they're gaining confidence and academic skills and organization skills and an awareness of who they are, and it seems to come within an EAP program. And so this is interesting things that we can take if you're an EAP teacher or maybe another teacher and think about, well, how does that relate to my own classroom? Then we've had studies published as well, just in general post-secondary contexts. One very interesting study was looking at canine therapy in higher education with English language learners. And what they found was that when students interact with dogs in canine therapy, it actually improves their ability to learn English. And why? Well, the dogs seem to act as a social lubricant, because when there's a dog there, it was a good reason to chat with someone. So English language learners might not want to chat with other people on campus, but when there was a dog, it was a good reason for people to talk with each other. And as we know, interaction is an engine for additional language learning. The dogs also seem to reduce anxiety, and reducing anxiety, that's lowering the affective filter. And students, we hypothesize that the authors hypothesize that interacting with dogs lowers the affective filter, allowing comprehensible input to enter. So I thought it was very interesting, and I thought, hey, now I can bring my dog to class. Yay! What else have we learned? Well, we've had studies about writing centers, showing what we can do in writing centers to improve them. We've had studies looking at language assessments in first-year post-secondary studies, and how schools developing their own language assessments, it's actually very beneficial for targeting other students, or schools that develop their own language assessments. It's useful for helping specific students. We've had articles about belongingness and how to instill a sense of belonging in our students. And a very interesting article that we had was looking at contract cheating in higher education. So this author did a study looking at academic misconduct, and specifically when students were paying other people to write their assignments for higher education. And he was wondering, what's driving this? Why would people think that they need to pay someone else to do their assignments? And he found it was very complex, and it was driven a lot by stress and a need to maintain academic status and GPA and different kinds of things such as that. And so this author had some interesting recommendations to help maybe mitigate some of those stressors that are prompting students to engage in contact cheating. So the interesting stuff that we're publishing in the journal. The last couple of things that we'll talk about, or the last theme that we can really look at, is teacher development. We've had we've had 2 articles written by graduate or now graduated people who are in grad studies. So if you're thinking about going on to higher education, or maybe doing your master's degree or a doctoral degree, we have some interesting articles that you might want to check out about creating a theoretical framework, or actually how to write that thesis. What are you going to do to put together your thesis? And then we've also had interesting articles. One that I was very useful is the first one at the top here. It's looking at common rhetorical patterns in conference abstracts. What these authors did was they looked at conference proposals and what are the elements of a successful conference proposal. So if you're thinking about presenting at a BCTEAL conference or maybe a TESOL conference, this would be a good article to read because they've analyzed what are the elements of a successful conference abstract. And then finally, the last article published in the journal that's related to teacher development in education was an article that was looking at the job prospects of TESOL graduates. So these are students who have finished their TESOL certificate, and now they're looking at this article looked at the complexity and the unpredictability that faces some students when they finish their TESOL certificate. And it has some recommendations on how TESOL programs and TESOL programs can support their learners or their teacher candidates, not just during the certificate, but once they leave as well. And so I feel like this is very valuable knowledge that we're capturing here in British Columbia and that we're producing here in British Columbia and that we're able to share with the world. I've summarized basically 4 years of articles in about 5 minutes. And so, but there's a lot of good reading in there for you if you're interested in looking at any of this. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, we have book reviews as well. Book reviews are a nice, friendly way for you to publish in the journal, too. And you can see there's some interesting books that have been reviewed by authors. So there you go. So as I said, that was a whirlwind, sort of explaining some of the different themes so far that have been published in the journal and some of the articles that we've published in the journal. By no means is this only what we focus on in the journal. I'm going to tell you in a minute about our scope and what kinds of articles we accept in the journal. But so really it's up to your imagination. We're willing to look at anything that's connected to English as an additional language, teaching and learning. It's just interesting that this is sort of the clusters that have come up in the journal so far. So there we go. So now we're at the good part. So we've looked a little bit at what we published so far in the journal. So now what I want to talk about is that pathway to publication. So because publishing for a scholarly journal like the BCTEAL journal, or maybe the TESOL Canada journal, or the Canadian Journal of Applied Linguistics, or I also mentioned some of the American journals like the CATESOL journal or the Nice TESOL journal. It's a little bit different than publishing for a newsletter. So for BCTEAL, we've streamlined it into an 8-step process. And I think a lot of peer-reviewed journals follow a process like this. We have some added steps in here. Oh, thank you, Laura. We have some added steps in here as well that I'll explain compared to other journals that I think are a value-added benefit of being a BCTEAL member. So you have an article, what do you do? The very first thing you do, well, you have to go to you go to, and I don't know if you can see the URL there, but you can go, the first thing is to go to the journal website. And once you've got an article that you're ready to submit, then you have to register for the website. And like I said, registration is free. And then you're going to read through. There's a lot of information on the website for authors, information on how to prepare your manuscript for submission. And so you're going to prepare your manuscript for submission according to what's recommended on the journal. And then it's as simple as hitting that submit button. And then next thing you know, I get an email in my inbox saying, hey, someone has just submitted an article. So let's see what happens to that article. So when you're ready to submit, what you'll find on the website is a submission preparation checklist. And so there's some things that are quirky about journals. The first thing is, if you're going to submit an article to the journal, you can't have published it anywhere else. And so you can't have published it in another journal because BCTEAL, it needs to be the first place that you've published something. However, if you've got an MA thesis lying around, or maybe an MEd project, or something that you wrote a long time ago, that you can dust those off. So, for example, an MA thesis, oh, that's a good question, Karen. An MA thesis is not considered published. If you've published it in a newsletter online, actually, so it depends on the length, but typically, and it would depend on what the newsletter's copyright policy would be as well, whether they would allow you to publish it somewhere. But generally, for the BCTEAL journal, we only accept things that are brand new. And also, they can't be under consideration elsewhere. So let's say you've written a nice article. You can't send it to 5 journals and see who comes back first. You can only do one at a time. So you have to submit it to, I don't know, Stanley's Journal of English, and you have to wait to see what they say. And then if they say no, they'll probably say yes, because I'm sure you're all awesome. But let's say they say no because they're crazy, then you can submit it to the BCTEAL journal. And also vice versa, you can't submit to the BCTEAL journal and then think, ooh, I'm going to submit it to TESOL Canada too. It's one or the other, so it's only one at a time. And then there's all kinds of advice on the website on what else you can do in terms of the preparation checklist. So I think, though, the most important thing about the preparation checklist, though, is every article that's submitted, the first thing I do is I go Control F, like Control Find, and I type in British Columbia. And if BC is not mentioned anywhere in your article, I'm probably going to email you back and say, hi, this is the BCTEAL journal, and it should connect to BC somehow. Now, that's okay if you're in Ontario and you've done a study in Ontario. We've published articles like that. But you have to think, okay, I live in Ontario and I published this article about research I did in Ontario. What does it mean for BC? Maybe include a paragraph telling us how this connects to our own lives here in British Columbia. So you're also going to read through the author guidelines. And like I said, I think the most important thing, though, is that it should have convincing and practical connections to British Columbia. The other thing, too, that's important about the journal is that articles they're more than just telling me about previous research you've read or previous theories you've read. So you can imagine you might have written a paper talking about important second language acquisition theory. But if all you've done is told us about this theory, that's not enough. You have to tell us the implications for a specific context. So, like, let's say you want to do that article on a review of second language acquisition theory. Well, what new are you adding to it? So maybe review of second language acquisition theory as it connects to link classrooms in British Columbia. Boom, now you're publishable, right? And so this is the idea of adding something else to it. And then I also think it's important, before you submit something, have a look at the other articles in the journal to get a sense of the kinds of articles we publish and the style that we use. But basically, we follow APA manuscript guidelines, and we have that explained on the journal website, but that's the American Psychological Association. We usually follow the 6th edition. There's a 7th now, but don't worry, nobody's ever been rejected because they haven't followed APA formatting. We're happy to help with that. And we also use Canadian spelling conventions and some other quirky things that we do here in Canada for our journals. And there's information about that online as well. But yeah, the other thing that's important to say, not only you can't submit one article to multiple journals. For the BCTEAL journal, you can only submit one article or essay per year. And so if you get an article published in 2019, you have to wait till 2020 before you could submit another article. So that was part one. So wow, that was a lot of talking just about part one, hitting the submit button. Now part two is what we call editorial review. And so the article now comes to me through the online journal system. And then I'm going to read your article and I'm going to decide, does it fit with the focus and scope of the journal? So the focus of the journal is teaching English as an additional language. So we only publish articles connected to teaching English as an additional language. You might have a great article about adult education, but if it doesn't connect to English language learners, I'll probably recommend that you submit it to another journal. And then the scope of our journal, as I've said, is British Columbia. So you might have a really great article that you've written about ESL in Nova Scotia, but unless you connect it somehow to BC, I'll probably recommend that you do some revisions right now at this point in order to connect it to British Columbia. However, once it fits with the focus and scope of the journal, then what I do is then I send it out to 2 anonymous peer reviewers. So the peer reviewers are genuinely your peers. They're typically members of BCTEAL. They're typically teaching in the same kind of context as you are. And we have peer reviewers from all walks of life. So we have peer reviewers who teach in LINC programs. We have peer reviewers who teach at university EAP program. We have peer reviewers who are teaching in teacher education programs and all kinds of people. This, from the moment you send the article, hit send to the moment I send it out for peer review, that can take up to 4 weeks. Because we really want to find good peer reviewers, and so we want to take our time and make sure we do a good job. Step 3 now, it's sitting with the peer reviewers. And so as I mentioned, our peer review is all double anonymous, so the identities are not shared between the reviewers and the authors. We really work hard with our reviewers to encourage them to offer concrete, collegial, and constructive suggestions, and it's all about strengthening work for publication. Typically, I won't send a paper out for review if I don't think it has a good chance of ending up published one day. And all papers that fit with our focus and scope will be sent out for review. Our peer reviewers are all listed on the website. Peer review can take a long time because this is all a labor of love and everybody's a volunteer. It can take up to 4 months for all the reviews to come back. Once the reviews come back, I compile them and I read through them and make sure nobody was having a bad day and was saying mean things, because we don't want to be mean. And then it'll be sent out. So we keep it constructive. So basically, for peer reviewers, we welcome all of you to be peer reviewers and volunteer for the journal. I think this is a great way as well to get an idea of the kinds of articles we publish before you send in your own article. But all authors are encouraged as well. The peer reviewers, there's a nice rubric that we have that's very easy to follow. It's a question and answer rubric. And if reviewers want, they get a copy of the manuscript. They can add comments onto there as well. But it's only about big picture ideas and suggestions to strengthen a manuscript for publication. So the reviewers, you don't need to get bogged down in grammar and spelling or wording, things like that. We'll catch that at a later stage. Right now, we're just looking at, oh, this person's missing some good citations. I would recommend that they add these, that kind of thing. And so the reviewers are thinking about things like, is the article interesting? Does the author know the topic? Are there any gaps in their knowledge? Are the conclusions and recommendations supported by the findings? There's all these questions that the reviewers have to help them as they're looking at a paper. This is all on the website as well. if you're writing an article for the journal, it's useful to look at the peer review guidelines and think to yourself, oh, this is what people are going to be looking at in my article. Other questions they're going to be thinking about, my favorite one is, are the authors indicating their own limitations? And so do they know what maybe is weakening their own paper, and what could they do in the future, and things like that. And then do they adhere to the suggested lengths? Please don't just take your MA thesis that's 40,000 words and submit it to the journal. Generally, like I said before, they're about 8,000 words long. If you send me a 40,000 word article, I'll send it back to you before it goes to peer review with a friendly recommendation that you cut some of this. Oh, good question, Karen. Yes, all of these questions are on the website, and they're actually more detailed on the website as well. And so you can actually follow through those questions as you're writing your paper, or as you're looking at your paper and preparing it. So as I mentioned, being a peer reviewer, it's a great way for you to prepare yourself to write an article, but it's also just as an important part of your own continuing professional development. I think it's a fun way to take part in the wider intellectual life of the field. And you're really looking at cutting edge research. Like you're seeing articles before they've been published. And so you're going to be ahead of the game. For me as well, when I'm reviewing a paper, it seems like it's a generative process. It sparks new ideas for me, and it gives me ideas of, hey, I could do this kind of study. I never thought about that before. And I feel like as the more papers I read, the better I'm getting a critical understanding of scholarship. Yeah, and I'm getting a greater familiarity with all kinds of research methods, and I'm understanding how the different parts of a paper connect with each other. And so it's interesting. I'm still developing my own literacy, and I'm developing that by reading through all of these articles. One thing though, don't worry, peer reviewers, we never ask you to do more than 1 or 2 reviews per year. So don't think that this is now going to take over your life. A review generally only takes about 3 hours. Where are my fingers? There we go. It only takes about 3 hours. 2 or 3 hours, because you're going to read the article and then you answer those questions on the rubric. I think it's investing 6 hours a year in professional development for free. It's awesome. Yeah. And then there's just some other ideas. The other thing though I like though is peer review. For me, it's starting to, I don't like it when we put theorists over here and we put professors over there and researchers here and instructors here and teachers there. I think by engaging in peer review, we're starting to blur those lines between us, and we're being true scholar practitioners, right? We're living inside of that hyphen, you know, that's between the scholar and the practitioner. So I like it. All right. Oh, that's just you don't have to read it. It's very tiny, but the other benefit to being a peer reviewer is you get to join the BCTEAL Journal Review Board, and some I guess instrumental reasons is that it's you're able to add this to your CV. And as the editor, I'm more than happy to write reference letters for any of our reviewers and say what awesome work they do for BCTEAL. And so that's another great reason to help us out. So anyway, wow, now we're on step 4. So it's gone through your paper has gone through peer review. And now I've compiled all of the feedback from the author, or from the peer reviewers, and I've sent it back to you. Oh, that's a good question about the peer reviewers. Actually, we do have peer reviewers who are from link programs, and we have peer reviewers who are from private English language schools as well. And we have some colleges and places like that. And so yeah, by no means do you need to be connected to a university in order to be a peer reviewer. Anyone who's a teacher and teaching English as an additional language can be a peer reviewer. So thank you for that good question. I want you all to know that you can all do it. So going back to the revisions, so most papers have to go through revisions after receiving the feedback and comments. Typically, once I send back the feedback, you'll have 1 or 2 months to revise your paper. And It depends on your timeline. We're happy to give you as long as you need in order to do those revisions. Key point, please use track changes in MS Word as you're doing your revisions so that we can follow the development of your manuscript. It's very important that I can see those track changes. You can also use the comments function if you want to explain something to the editor, but we need to see all of that on your manuscript. For me, this is very tiny, so don't worry if you can't read it. But what I like to do when I get the feedback from a peer reviewer for my own papers, I like to make a chart. So I make a simple table in MS Word, and I'll put the reviewer's comments, I'll cut them up into little snippets that I can deal with, and then I put them in their own little block. And then as I deal with each reviewer comment, I'll write about what I did. And then that way I can keep track of what I'm doing. I have to tell you now, when I first started writing articles for journals, there were a lot of tears. Yeah, it was pretty sad to see a 40-year-old man crying in front of his computer, because sometimes the feedback could seem overwhelming. But when I started to chunk it up and put it into a table, I started to think, oh, I see what's going on. I see. Yeah, and especially when it's in a spirit of strengthening our work, I think this is a good thing. So, and I'm happy to help you as the editor set up one of these tables. So if you get your feedback and you like write back, hey, Scott, wow, this feedback is great. Do you have any suggestions? I can help you set up a table like this and everything as we start to tackle those revisions. And that brings me to step 5. Step 4 and 5 sort of go together. And this is something special about the BCTEAL journal. It's also special about a lot of the TESOL affiliate journals. So I'm thinking about like New York's journal or California's journal or Oregon's journal, in that we see ourselves very much as a mentorship journal. So once again, we're not looking for reasons to reject you. We're here to help you. And so we have a developmental editing stage where if you want, this is as much as you want, we can work with you to address the peer reviewer comments and suggestions. And we can give you advice on style and structure. And this is a real opportunity for you to make substantive changes to your article paired up with the editor. And I really enjoy being a developmental editor. I've done a lot of this work now, and it's and I even my own work as an author for Oxford University Press. Oh, you're welcome, Ange. It's a labor of love. But even my own work that I've done for Oxford University Press, you might see my books and think, wow, Scott's awesome. Guess what? I'm not that awesome. I had a really good editor, right? And so I think it's important to have an editor. And so, wow, your manuscript is done, the revisions, and you send it back to me, and it has all those beautiful track changes, and it has all the comments. Guess what? I'm going to read your article again. And then I'm going to go through, I'm going to think, have you addressed the reviewer comments? Now, remember, you don't always need to address every comment a reviewer has. Sometimes a reviewer might not have understood what you wanted to do, and you can respond and say, no, I didn't add this extra thing they wanted me to add because of reasons A, B, and C. That's another thing you can do. But anyway, once we're happy, I'm going to go through and I will, not you, I will clear off all the track changes and delete all the comments. And now we have a beautiful, clean draft. That draft will now go to the copy editing stage. Now, either sometimes I do the copy editing, but we also have volunteers that help out with copy editing. But now this is where we start to read for clarity, readability, consistency, and accuracy. This typically takes about 1 month for our copy editor to read through your article. And the copy editor will use track changes again, but now they're very light edits. Usually at this point, we're catching typos, maybe sentences that don't quite make sense. I know even myself, I'll write a sentence and I understand it in my brain, but when someone else reads it, they're like, what the heck, Scott? And so once in a while in the copy editing stages, we'll put comments. We call them queries. And we might query, like, have you thought of this wording? And we might provide some alternative wording. Then when you get the copy edited manuscript back, you can read those comments and you can think, yeah, that's a good suggestion. Maybe I'll do that. And then you'll use track changes. I say track changes a lot to change what you want. Or maybe you don't like the copy editor's suggestion and you think of a third way to do it. That's great too. But this is your chance now to do minor edits in copy editing. And then you're going to send me back your paper again, and now it's copy edited. I'm going to read through the whole thing, and I'm going to clean off all your track changes. I'm going to get rid of your comments, and then I'm going to create a PDF of your paper. This is called the galley proof, and I'm going to write galley proof across it diagonally, and I'm going to send it back to you one more time. This is your last chance to proofread that article, and then you'll be surprised, we're still finding typos. Sometimes I've read articles 7 times, and then suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot a comma. Or, my goodness, I can't believe I spelt my own name wrong, you know? And so this is your chance to do your last proofreading. Only minor corrections, so you can't say to me, I want to add a new theoretical framework. This is just the minor correction stage. This is really fast turnaround, like just 1 or 2 weeks. And then, boom, it gets published. Yay! And we publish on an ongoing basis. So as soon as your article is ready for publishing, it goes up on the website. And it will look like this. So this is our latest article by Nathan DeVos. And you'll get your own page with your own URL. And then also the PDF will go up. I don't know. I just love BCTEAL's PDFs of the journal articles. Maybe I'm a bit weird, but sometimes I don't even read the articles. I just flip through the pages thinking how beautiful they look. But anyway, they look like real journal articles. Oh, guess what? We are a real journal. So it just looks beautiful. It's something you can like print out and give your mom. Anyway. So there you are. So that's our 8-step process. And so it might seem like a lot, but trust me, this is quite streamlined, maybe compared to some of the big international journals. And I think we're a good place to start. And so this is it. It's about 7:55-ish right now. And so this is your chance. If there's any other questions that you might have or any comments, feel free to write in the just to write something in the chat box. And I'll try and answer them as we're going. But today what we're trying to do, we're trying to look at like what the BCTEAL journal does to support scholarship and what's the pathway. And I hope we've answered those questions. Just a last minute plug, in April, we have a BCTEAL conference coming up. It's a great if you write a paper and then present on it, it saves a lot of work. So there you go. Thank you very much. I love to plug the conference. So this is my contact information. Feel free to email me anytime. Also, if you just Google Scott Douglas UBC, my email will come up as well. There's the URL. We're recording this, so you'll be able to get a copy of this as well, because what I have here, there's 3 pages of references. So if, in case you want to check out any of my references from the talk, but basically that's it. So I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm going to go to the very last slide, and I'm going to pass over the floor to Laura. But just everybody, thank you so much for staying with me for this hour. I really appreciate everybody who gave up their night to hang out and talk about publishing in a journal. You're all awesome, and I hope to hear from you soon. So there we go. Thank you very much. Yay.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was very informative. I think, I don't know about anyone else, but I'm definitely inspired to volunteer with the BCTEAL journal or newsletter in some way, whether that be writing an article or peer reviewing. And I think it's amazing that it's so inclusive and so developmental and there to support people. I think a lot of people can feel intimidated by journals. And I think what you've done is amazing to make that opportunity accessible to a lot of different people. So thank you for that.
Oh, it takes a village. There's I think I counted last, we have 40 volunteers that are involved in the journal. So it's not just me, there's a lot of us involved.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I guess I'll just say the next webinar will be in February 2020. We don't have a presenter yet. And again, I think it would be nice if the webinars were kind of more focused in a similar vein to your journal and the newsletter in terms of accessibility for a variety of presenters. So if that's something that interests you, you can always contact us. And I guess the BCTEAL Regional Conference will be at Camosun College in Victoria on Saturday, February 22nd. So if anyone's on the island, we'd love it if you came to that. And happy holidays and see you in 2020.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting now if nobody else has anything to say. All right, thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.